Hey guys, welcome back to the Gumboot Garden. Today I wanted to chat with you about keeping record of your gardening seasons. Now, this is definitely not something that is necessary for you to do, but it's definitely super beneficial and will make your future gardening seasons much easier. There are many different ways that you can keep track of things going on in your garden, whether it be a written journal or a binder, so you can attach in all of these extra papers and resources. You can do something like Notion that is more of a digitalized record, or even something like an online app like Seed Time, where it automatically has a calendar or timeline set up where it tracks your sowing, your transplanting, your harvesting dates, but also another section where you can add in additional notes. Now, I have tried multiple of these, the first being my handwritten journal. And, when I was using this, I was handwriting all of my own notes. I was creating all of my own charts. I was even doing some drawing, and I was being really creative with this, and I really did enjoy that I was able to be creative. I was able to just pick this up, bring it down into the garden, and add in notes as I thought of them. It's just that after a couple years, I found it to be a little bit more time consuming than I actually had time for while keeping track of everything in the garden. So that is when I ended up moving to Notion. Notion is a free app that you can download onto your computer, and you can use it whether it's online or offline, which is really nice. And you can create charts and tables and timelines. You can add in pictures or snapshots from web pages, and you can also add in links from other resources that you found on the web. So it's really nice. You can keep everything really easily accessible and organized in one spot. So if you are someone that loves to create methods to organize your things in your life, Notion really would be the app for you. I love doing this. I love having everything easily accessible. I love having a method in place that makes this so nice and easy. One thing I will say is that I tried to do this at the wrong time of year. So I was actually trying to put these methods in place and have a nice organized system. At the same time, I was also going through my spring and summer garden, which, as many of you know, that is also like the busiest time of year for us. So it really didn't work this year. It was this year that I did it. It really didn't work this year, but it is something I want to get set in place. I really do like using Notion. I'm just gonna take this winter season to try and put a method in place that is easy and really works, where I know exactly where to go to put in all of my information. And it's also something that I'd like to make as a template for you guys to download, so then you don't have to worry about creating one for yourself, but you can just download the template and just have it ready to be putting in your information and make it a lot easier for you guys. The only thing is, like I said, I want to work on this throughout my winter season, and then I need to test it to make sure that it works and is nice and easy. So hopefully by this time next year, so March 2025, I'll have a template for you guys to download that can make it easy for you to organize all of your garden stuff. And when I have that set up, I will link it down in the description box below here, but I'll also probably create another video just kind of going through everything and showing you my thought process and how I've put it together for you to input your information. I have started to journal in Notion for my garden season, but I've also been using the app Seed Time this year to keep track of my sowing and transplanting and harvesting dates. Seed Time has really made it easy to keep track of all of those dates for your sowing, transplanting, and harvesting, because it puts it on a nice calendar, which is easy to read, and it even helps you decide some of the best dates to sow and transplant for your growing season, which is really nice. It does also have an additional notes section where you can add in pictures, and you can make sure that you're recording anything like pests and diseases, or any adjustments that you do want to make to next year's growing season. And I will put a link to that down in the description box as well, in case you're interested in checking out Seed Time. These are just a few of the different options that you can use to record things from your summer garden. And it might take you a couple years to really settle in on one that works for you. I mean, like I've said, like I started with a written journal. I'm using the app Seed Time, and I also really want to get into using Notion. So it just might take some time to decide what works best. But the important thing isn't like where or how you're recording them, but that you actually are keeping these records. Because, when we're going into a new garden season, we don't want to have a blank slate. We want to remember all of those things that worked from previous years and be able to do that again. And we also want to remember our mistakes too, because we learn from our mistakes. So we don't want to repeat them. We want to, try and fix them and resolve them for future years to come. So that brings me into, what we should be keeping track of. Now, some of the basic planning things that I think everyone should really be recording are your sowing dates, your transplanting dates, your harvesting dates. You should really be creating a garden or planting map each year so you know where everything has been planted. But you also want to keep track of all of the different crops and varieties that you are growing. Keeping track of all of your sowing and transplanting dates is really going to make each garden season much, much simpler as you go along, because you can use these as a reference in future gardening seasons, just so long as you're making sure to keep note of things that worked really well and worked perfectly and other things that you might need to make adjustments on. And you just keep making these little adjustments each year until you find that perfect sowing date, and then you just stick with it. But this comes from like keeping those records so you can make sure that you're, able to pinpoint it. The same holds true with keeping your garden map and a list of your varieties, because when growing different varieties, we can often see that some varieties either like or really dislike our particular garden climates. So everyone has different luck with different varieties, but when we find varieties that aren't working, we can make sure not to grow as many of them. If we find things that really are working, then we have record to grow more of them. Same thing with your different crops and where you're placing them. We have different parts of our garden. Some parts of our garden might be shadier than others. Some might be like baking in the afternoon sun. Others might be getting hit with more wind and more of the harsh elements. So, plants will respond differently in different areas. So if we are recording different plants that really loved being in that hot sun, or other plants that could still thrive even though they were getting beat by a lot of that wind, then those little things will help us in future gardening seasons and help us remember. Because, a lot of times we think, oh yeah, I'm going to remember that for next year. But the next year comes and you're like, oh, I wish I had written that down, because I know it was something, really did well there, but I can't remember what it was. So just keeping those records is really, really helpful. Other things that are important to record would be how many seeds you've sown of each crop and variety, how many of those then grew into strong plants that you could transplant into the garden, your fertilization calendar, any amendments that you did to your garden beds and how soon or how far ahead of time you did that, planting or growing guides that you have found or techniques that you used that really did well and worked well, any seasonal weather, any pests, any plant diseases. These are all things that are really important but might not be directly related to the next growing season, because some things like pests, we might not get the same pest every single year, but it might be 4 years later we have that same pest problem, and it's good to have it on record, all of the different things that we did to try to eradicate them and whether it worked or didn't work. So whether we need to use that same method to help us, or that method didn't work, so let's try a new one. It also allows us to see with the different seasonal weather, some years we might have really, rain after rain after rain, where other seasons are just super dry. We need to water it more, and crops do differently in different weather conditions. So it's good to know what plants are thriving or able to thrive in that hot summer heat, and where others that bolted very quickly or didn't do well in that heat, but really like those rainy conditions. Fertilization schedule, of course, just like your sowing and transplanting dates. If you're fertilizing, you want to keep that calendar. It will help you within that growing season to remember, how often you have to do that, but also in future growing seasons to remind you, oh yeah, I did it. Like I started it and right in November. Well, you guys probably wouldn't be starting in November, but maybe you're starting it in like May. I started fertilizing in May, and I did it every 2 weeks. So it's good to have that record kept so you know exactly what you've done and what works. And also your soil amendments. So just knowing like, oh yeah, I amended this one bed with manure and compost, and everything in there just shot up and was big and huge and gave me such a big harvest. But this other bed, I didn't do that. I amended it with just like blood and bone and didn't get to add any compost to it, and maybe things didn't do as well. So just having that, again, just keeping those records, things that you might not even be as attuned to if you aren't doing this record keeping. But just when you are keeping records, it makes you think more about all of the things that are happening in your garden and how it's affecting your crops and your harvest. So I also want to mention a couple of the fun things that you might want to keep record of. So that would be things like your total harvest weight or numbers. You might want to keep track of the grocery store price at the time of harvest so you can see how much you're saving, different ways that you preserved and how much it yielded, different recipes that you're using to preserve that you really like, maybe future ways that you'd like to preserve, but also a garden reflection. So a season reflection at the end of your garden year, just having sitting down, reflecting on everything that happened, seeing what you'd want to grow more or less of, different varieties that you really liked and want to try again, any changes that need to be made to the garden, whether it's, fertilizing more or growing things in different places or keeping them under cover longer, just anything that would help you grow as a gardener. And I think this should probably be up in the important section of things that you should be recording, because actually reflecting on your garden season is probably one of the most important things that you can do to really get a better garden next year. But as far as all the others, these are all things that I have started to record this year, and I've really found it awesome. It's so much fun to just it's one thing to bring in a basket of tomatoes, but it's a whole other thing to actually weigh them and see, oh my God, the amount of tomatoes that is coming in is actually huge. So it's really fun to see those things. It's also was interesting to see how the actual prices of things at the grocery store fluctuated throughout, spring and summer. I didn't know to track all of these things in my first growing season. They're either things that after a couple growing seasons, I saw, I wish I had kept record of that. So now I've started to keep record. Either that, or maybe they were things I thought at the beginning of the season, hey, you know what? I'm going to start to weigh all of my harvests and just kind of see how it is. But all of these things that I'm keeping track of and record of, they might not be as important for you to keep track of. And that's all right. But I just wanted to let you guys know everything that I'm recording in case maybe you hadn't thought of them yet, and, you thought it was a good idea or something that you really want to start recording. And same holds true with you guys. If I haven't mentioned something that you think is beneficial for someone else, put it down in the comments below, and we'll all share ideas with each other. But that's it for today, guys, and I will catch you in the next one. See ya.